This morning's, at least morning here, this morning's Dharma talk is titled Emotional Lockdown. And the idea here with that title is everyone, I think, experiences, at least I experience, a quality of emotions that seem to be what we call emotions, are backed up or have a foundation of thought patterns, and the various exchanges between thought patterns or thoughts and emotions. It gets very mixed up and cloudy there, and we want to feel like we are somebody, like we're in control, or at least we have some understanding of what's going on, and we will accept even and be with and conclude and validate emotions using thoughts. Will validate the emotions by leaving the emotion slightly and going into a thought pattern around that. It seems to have to do with the Yogacara structure of consciousness as it's laid out in the 8 consciousnesses, that being the Klista Mana Vijnana or Vijnana, the 8, the kind of the meddling or what is called, I read recently where it was called the nuisance consciousness. So, and actually there's one situation that's consciousness, and then it's not that there's a separate consciousness that is the alaya or the storehouse consciousness. Excuse me. They tend to separate into a different consciousness is not a bunch of different things, or even the I consciousness and the thinking consciousness or the olfactory consciousness are separated, and they are separated with the support of the this organism, the body-mind construct. In some people, they tend to overlap quite a bit more than in others. But the part that I wanted to talk about today a little bit and receive questions, of course, would be that part of that aspect of the consciousness that tends to have some kind of emotional response. It could be triggered by just someone's gesture, someone's comment. It could be there are probably so many different ways that this could come about that it might be different every time. And what we do with that is, as with the general population, you could say, does with that, is they make a big deal out of it, and they may make a big deal and go deep within and feel difficulty or shame or remorse or any of these things. And it's not that a little bit of that couldn't happen, just by being in necessary conditions, by being in a physical manifestation. But the 7th consciousness, or this difficult area of the consciousness, this self-centered area, the manipulating area, the actual producing thoughts area, seems to be include itself into that dynamic, interfere, adjust, take exception, take exclusion, on and on. So the idea here is to, through the sitting practice of meditation, through awareness practice, which is, as you've heard me say thousands of times, sit down, hold still, hold very still. Everything you can hold still, hold that still. If you can hold the mind still, go ahead. But good luck. Hold very still and watch this very subtle movement of probably thought patterns. It could be memories. It could be just what's happening outside the window of the building you're in. It could be noises from the other room. Could be the fragrance of incense or flowers. So what we're doing there is the consciousness is just observing what's coming and going. What seems to happen is we, instead of just being on receive, in our everyday life, we're always producing something on top of what we're receiving. So it's kind of a manipulation approach, and we can't really stop the manipulation. Just reach out and grab it, stop it, because that would be more manipulation, and it would also be buying into the warfare mentality or the peace fair mentality. And if you don't understand what I'm saying, you should ask about it later. So that emotional lockdown is pretty brutal, because it can just take a mind that is just walking through the house, down the hallway, going to the closet or something, some very mundane situation, and something can trigger that. It may be something that is triggering, that is in your relative environment, which is a little easier to work with. But if that triggering is coming from uninspected or a misunderstanding about how things arise out of, you could say, out of the alia, which is a way of talking about it, not necessarily a location. That particular situation, if it's not pleasant, and if it's something that is coming through like a repressed memory, you could say, or like something from some other situation has gotten into the hallway where you're walking down towards the closet, and it doesn't seem to have a particular source. So then the attribution goes right to me and my feelings, my life, what's happening, what somebody just said to me, and we invent a whole scenario. We write a whole Shakespearean situation around all of that, and then, which of course causes a more intense emotional lockdown. So if you can, and this is the simple message that I have for you. I'm going to put down this kotsu before I hit myself in the nose with it. And that is when and you have to train to do this, but it also can be somewhat post-meditation. If you're doing mind training, sitting down, holding still, facing the wall, and observing what moves, and thereby strengthening or prioritizing the awareness that receives instead of the awareness that produces thoughts, ideas, conclusions, exclusions, opinions, ideas, on and on and on. It's just one labyrinth of elaboration after another. So just sit down, watch what moves. And that way, when you get up off the cushion, it's not going to happen right away. It might not even happen this week, let alone 3 years from now. But you might as well start somewhere. Might as well start now. Excuse me. And so the idea is to, when the emotion begins to rise, begins to kind of add to your, using that same metaphor, walking down the hallway, walking towards the closet to get your code or to put away your code or something like that. Something arises either there or somewhere else. And then the idea, rather than adding on to it with a very simple thing like, why am I feeling this way? This is ignorance. This is a highly stylized form of ignorance that promotes the seventh consciousness, or I wrote them down because I often forget them: self-view, self-conclusion, pride of self, love of self. Those four, and there are probably lots of other nuances and various ways of talking about that self-centered me feeling. That wants to jump in, that aspect of consciousness wants to draw up around that, almost like proving, yes, I'm here because I'm the one who's feeling this negativity and I need to find out what it is. It creates a whole scenario that envelops us, unless you've understood or began to understand these teachings, which are basically saying, you don't have to do that. You can actually just receive whatever occurs. And what you're kind of doing is you're taking instead of the consciousness all shrinking up into a ball of me protecting this and advancing this and separating from that, self-view, self-conclusion, pride of self, love of self, instead of those four, somehow those aspects of consciousness that describe the way the self-centeredness becomes somebody with this particular feeling that was caused by that particular situation. There's constant separating and division, propaganda from the ego. and divisiveness. We see that all over. People actually fuel or feed themselves off from being able to divide. I'm sure you recognize that mudra. Divide. So it's not about fighting with that or trying to stop dividing. You would think it would be. Nope, that's not it. It's not that you couldn't do that, and you could come up with strategies. You could write a book on it, how you divided or how you kept from dividing things and became all one. So this is I'm mocking this a little bit because it's not that the people doing this don't have good intentions. Of course they do. They have good intentions. And sometimes because of the karma that brought them into this situation, have a lot of personal charisma. So they're able to have the bully pulpit or center stage right away because of karma that brought them there that is not selective. The karma doesn't care who takes over. Because karma is not separate from the very consciousness that manifests. So it's not impersonal. It's even that word there's no word for it. Because then you're using a relative thing that used to be this way, but now it's this way. No, it's like it is right now. Even the division itself is Buddha nature. Everything is Buddha nature. Everything is what? Awake. Everything is awake. Everything is consciousness. Everything is consciousness only. And I'm not necessarily aligning myself with the teaching of Walpole's or Vasubandhu or any other person. Nor am I differentiating myself from that because in some cases, this particular way of looking at the 8 consciousnesses or the of the Yogacara tradition may be appropriate. And another time, something else may show up as being more pertinent. So as a practice, I would say, if you're doing a lot of mind training, a lot of sitting, a lot of wall gazing, very simple form. And I'm not, again, as I've said many times, I'm not against all the other fancy kinds of forms. I just don't teach them. Not yet. And maybe never. I don't know. I do things as they show up. I don't plan hardly at all. I barely know what I'm going to do in the next 15 minutes. Unyo knows, so she lets me know what to do next. So the idea here is to, as the feeling comes up, I'm going to use my fingerture, and as it starts to twist and kind of trying to make a nest for itself in your chest cavity or in your mind or in your gut, these 3 places, there's the emotional center, the heart center, or not necessarily the blood pumping organ or the chakra for that matter. And drop down, rise up idea that I've mentioned before. But just be wherever it's at, then just be there. Dropping down, rising up may not even be appropriate at this particular time that you are working with emotional, what do they call it, fixation or lockdown. Something's locked. Once the lockdown has happened, you have to deal with what? The lockdown. You have to actually relate to that aspect that the emotions have got you. They've got their claws into you, so to speak. Use more metaphors. And to do anything with that other than just feel it, to think about it. Why did this happen? To think about it. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done this. I should change. I shouldn't be this way. This is not good for me. Any kind of commentary, or to go into some kind of parabola that runs back into 3 lifetimes ago, or 30 years ago when you were just born, or 20 years ago when you were being abused. Don't go there, and don't abandon that. If you're just working through awareness, whatever you need will show up and be perfectly timed, to use that timing idea. So it is about receiving. We practice receiving. It's hard to just walk into a bulldozer and receive it. So we practice bulldozer gazing. Sit down, hold still, look at the wall. That's your practice bulldozer. Sit down, look at the wall. Just observe, just observe. There's enough negativity there to practice on for years and years. And you know it if you've done any meditating at all. Sit down, hold still, watch that. Just observe that, my friends. Just observe it. There's nothing else. There's nowhere to get. There's just realization. And what you're looking for, you already are. How do I know? You know I don't know. That's how I know. Knowing is way overrated. Just because it's spelled with a K. Or is it a N? It's a K. So you look at that situation, and then I'm just going to paint a little picture. Then by getting up off the cushion, going into your life, living, bumping up against people and things and furniture, and having people scowl at you for no reason, having other people smile at you for no reason, which is also can be disconcerting because they wonder if they've suddenly found out all the terrible things you've done. They're about to pin the tail on the donkey. So just sit down, train your mind, and then just get up and what we call post-meditation or everyday meditation in action, which I don't teach a technique. The technique I teach is sit down and sharpen the blade. When you get up, it's your blade. It's your awareness. It's your karma. If the blade is sharp, if you're really prioritizing awareness first, not thinking process, but awareness first, then you will see a fresh delivery of your personal karma, which I don't know how to work with that because I can't see it. All I can see is what happens to this person or in the immediate environment. But when you walk out, you have a whole trail. You could have tons and tons of luggage and baggage that will need to be looked into or looked at and not accepted, not rejected, not do nothing with it. Less is better. If you do anything with it, the very spinning quality of that illusion will hook you and take you around for 15 or 20 laps. And then you get dumped and you think it's over with. And then no, it's on its own cycle and you cannot inspect that cycle. It's hard enough to inspect the cycle of the moon. I mean, you don't know where the moon's at right now, unless you're an astrologer. And even astrologers might know where the moon's at, but they don't know what it means. So what do? Come up with ideas about it. This is what everybody does. They study something, and then they come up with ideas about what they're studying. There are people in past times that did not do that. They couldn't tell the difference between a mountain and a cloud. They didn't need to. Nothing was separate. So everything opened up totally appropriately. When it was time to shoot the deer appeared. This is not magical thinking. It may look that way, but it's not. It's just dependent origination with no interference. There is no alaya vijnana. Everything is arising as it is with no interlocutor called me. So one more time, when that negativity arises, if you can, through your sitting practice of meditation, be able to just observe the quality, the texture, you might also feel a story around it, and that could be part of the texture rather than some special gate pass to run off in another direction into some kind of discursiveness about the situation and who caused it and how you could fix it or how bad that you've been. I know the negativity that I sometimes have to deal with from my past karma is not easy. Just do it anyway. You can do it. I'd be happy to take questions if you have them.
Shoto has a question.
Shoto.
Is there a transformed seventh consciousness that's not a nuisance?
There's different ways of talking about it. Anytime we're using any concepts, you're going to have, like I mentioned, Walpola Rahula, he disagrees with this. Vasubandhu disagrees with, it's people are shifting this around based on their own perception, and they're much more gifted than I am in that area. And I'm just lucky but I'm not gifted, or I'd be making up stuff too. Instead, I just say, it's in front of you. You find out. So the seventh consciousness will continue to persist as a kind of dynamic. If you've been studying that and using that to understand your own consciousness, so those four qualities of self-love, pride of self, self-reference, self-view, and self-conclusion. There they are. So you can't even remember those. You don't need to. What you need to remember is just observe. Keep it simple. Just receive. Keep it simple. Give everything your attention. Keep it simple. And of course, train your mind. How do you do that? Sit down and look how untrained it is. Look how crazy this whole situation is that we call the mind. So that seventh consciousness, the way my metaphorical way of talking about it's like a building. It might still be there, but all the doors are gone. All the windows are gone. There's nobody guarding at the door. There's just a bunch of wind blowing through. It's called karma. It's just wind blowing this way and that way. There might the difference between the alaya that we think is over here and the other six sense fields, including the mind, they're over here. Those are not in two different places. There are no two different places. That's called duality. There isn't anything but this. You just can't see the back of your head yet. Further questions on that or any other thing that's been mentioned?
Yes. Junshu asks, when someone is trying to fix us, how do we receive that?
Be kind to them. Their intention is probably, they might call it fixing you or helping you or serving you or helping you out or trying to be kind to you, when actually it's about them, because they're looking at their projection of you. They can't see you. You could practically just move to one side and watch their eyes still looking at the space that you left. So how should you receive them? See that they're suffering and they're trying to fix their own suffering. They can't get a hold of their own. You notice how people are so quick to give you advice and yet their life is a mess. I'm laughing not because it's heartbreaking to see people suffer so much, but because it's kind of so obvious to one who has trained their mind. I'm sure you've noticed through training your mind, you might not feel like you're making much progress, but you'll notice that if you go out so-called into the world, which we can't do right now so much, and just have a conversation with anybody who has no mind training. I don't care how smart they are. They don't do any extensive mind training, and because the present moment, or this very, very powerful, authentic presence, you just start to see that that's who you are. So therefore, you're not somebody else. You're still the same person, except authentic, except present, except no place else. So when you come into the purview of someone who is confused and everything, and they see you and they see your problems, and they well, you know what I do is I do this. Or this is what what you should do with that. You should. I'm sure you've noticed it doesn't mean that you've gotten rid of your difficulties. You're still on the path. You're still working with confusion in a way that is using awareness to understand that, rather than manipulation or control or results. You don't need results. The results might be there if you have a seed and you want to plant asparagus, which I don't think you can do. But if you want to do that, then there's cause and effect. And then we work with cause and effect where it's at. But when it starts to get into areas of consciousness, cause and effect, there is no time and space there. Notice that? That's quite a discovery if that's not shown up for you. So just observe. And when it comes to someone trying to help you, be respectful to them. Respect their confusion, rather than try to change them, rather than try to do to them what they're trying to do to you. No, don't. Be very, very respectful to someone's karma in your mind, and see that. And then at some point, you maybe next month, maybe next year, they might come back and say, I've been thinking about, could you teach me how to meditate? It's unlikely because all of the input that's coming from every direction. But it's possible if your connection with them has not been damaged by you trying to manipulate them, then there's a possibility there's enough openness there that because we're not separate, then one who manifests as not separating themselves or buying into any kind of separation, those people who are looking for that kind of understanding, they don't even know it. They don't even know what they're looking for. You remember those days? Didn't know what you were looking for? Now you don't know what you're looking at. This is called training the mind. I'll help you. Further questions?
Wendy asks, what is peace fair?
It's more polarity. Warfare is going to war, and then peace fair is fighting against war. You know, the words are all over the place. The fight against the coronavirus. This is a really dumb thing to say. It's embarrassing to hear highly educated human beings start using the whole idea of war. I mean, we'd like to not have war, and here we are using these metaphors. So you might have to do it some, and even in the Buddha Dharma, we use weapons of war as images. They've been used for centuries. The two-edged sword, and so on, and cutting things and so on. But when I say don't go to war, don't go to peace, don't do anything with it. Just observe the energy going back and forth. And you'll notice that people who are going to peace, carrying signs, marching against the terrible monsters of the right wing or whatever. Anytime anybody has an agenda about anything that includes you going to peace, let's go to peace, let's go to war. Look at it closely, I would say. Look at it. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. Maybe your karma is going to drag you into that situation. But it would be good if you go into it with a lot of awareness around what is happening. Not awareness of right and wrong, but awareness of the fundamental dynamic of manipulation and control, and the secretiveness of self-centeredness, how it tries to manifest as helpful. But really, it's all about me, and how I can get control of myself and everybody else, or the appearance of control, which is, of course, dependently arisen. So don't go either direction. This doesn't mean you couldn't think about that. I'm not saying don't have any thoughts about it, but don't necessarily move away from what this is. The wall you're looking at, your wife, your husband, your pets, your kitchen table, into something else, or into something else about that, unless it just shows up as something that you need to observe, which is called receiving. Just receive. Further questions are good.
Chisho asks, what is the relationship between awareness and consciousness?
So the different ways of talking about it. Here, this is a way that I've talked before, and maybe this will help. And Chisho, if you have some other dynamic about this that I might be missing, then you can ask again or ask another question. But the consciousness I think of as that let's start out with awareness. Awareness is a little chunk of consciousness that you can put somewhere. You can be like, I can move my awareness right now. I can move my awareness to the top of your head, Chisho. That's where it's at now. And now it's back here. I can move it out here to that cloud that I'm not looking at, but I remember it because I just looked out there. And a few moments ago, I said, you can't tell the difference between the mountains and the clouds. And the cloud I looked at, it's gone now, but it was shaped exactly like a mountain. So I didn't think that up. I'm just a reporter. I just report what I see. And what I see, not separate. Everywhere I look, it's not separate. So therefore, the top of your head, my consciousness or my awareness, it's movable. It's a movable understanding. And to go a little deeper into consciousness, I would say that's the more, you could say, impersonal aspect. That's the area that's conscious of body temperature, consciousness of food digestion, or everything, growth of your fingernails. You don't have to say, I better get on those fingernails. They're slowing down. I better put my awareness there and get them to grow. So there's dynamics that we come into this life already able to have a little bit of say-so, and a whole lot of area that we don't have any direct awareness of. If we did, we would be freaked out. If suddenly your awareness went down to what was happening in your intestines, or something was happening in your digestive tract, you'd freak out. I certainly would. Now, Mark Hirsch, he might not. He might get really curious about why he suddenly is looking right at something that he's never been able to see before. And he might be, because of being a physician, I'm just picking on Mark a little bit, but he might be really magnetized by that. Just because of the area that shows up in shows up in a person who's already really focusing on all the elaborations and conclusions and contraptions that are going on in that area. So there might be, but for me or for you, probably to go down into that area. Now, you being a chemist, you might get, your awareness might spread out in a different way. It might take the trail, but awareness can't go somewhere that consciousness is not already at. So awareness is the focal part of, and that's what gives us so much feedback that we are somebody somewhere, because of the eyes, the eye organ receiving shapes, colors, and so on. And it's just so easy for the seventh consciousness to say, "Yeah, me. That's me. I'm the one who's seeing. I'm the one who appreciates art." Let's see what else we have. Self-view. I'm the one. Self-conclusion. I'm the one. Self-pride. I'm the one. Voice a little bit deeper. Self-love. Voice a little bit higher. I'm the one. It's me. We all have great examples on the world scene of people who are, because of the confusion that's been going on for centuries in our politics, you could say, the things that are showing up now are just, they're dependently arisen. No one crazy person decided to climb the ladder of sanity into the God realm where they're in charge of everything. No, those ladders in the Asura Loka, or that jealous God realm, those have been plated with all kinds of strong material, so you can go and get ahead. The whole scene of CEOs and these huge corporations that are making money, and suddenly all these Bolsonaros are showing up all over the place. Not wrong. It's dependently arisen. I'm chuckling just because what else would happen if what happened in 1980, who was elected then, who was elected in 1925. We're just talking about the United States, not to mention all the other places. And then if you read some of the books on, not to go too far into this, but read on the indigenous people who lived in this country and the way their societies were set up, is a pretty reasonable way that things showed up there. And then those Europeans wiped them out.
Another question, one from Chazon. Sometimes it seems like the emotional lockdown is very obvious, like when we are triggered. But sometimes it may seem like we have an underlying aversion to emotions. Is there a way to begin opening up to our emotions?
So don't try to open up. Notice how fast I respond to that. Don't try to open up. Just be the emotion. Just it's just an emotion, and it just, the addition part is it sucks. I don't like it, or where did it come from? Don't fall for that. Don't fall for that particular teensy weensy elaboration. Where did it come from? Who did it? Who caused it? The very question there says, I want control of this. I want to be able to shut it off. It's like saying, I want to shut off palm trees. I'm sick of them. Deciduous trees are much better. Isn't a palm tree a deciduous tree? Yeah. Is it a perennial? Is it an annual? Is it related to the cabbage? It's just an extended variety of various ways that we keep avoiding what? This. That's why we look at a wall So that keeps it as simple as possible so the blade can actually get sharpened. So a field, if the emotion is happening, if it's coming up, it's yours.
Juju has another question. Could observation look like locking down from an outside perspective?
Yeah. From an outside perspective, it could look like locking down, but the addition of from an outside perspective, I'm not sure if you're talking about someone else looking at you doing this, or from you thinking that you have some kind of magical objectivity.
Laura asks, what if there is not a lot of negativity to deal with? Does this point to a lack of progress?
No. It's just, I hesitate to say what it is because it's so different. I'm speaking to you personally, Laura, because I know you a little bit. I would say just keep going. Don't look for anything else, and don't necessarily compare yourself with me or anybody else or any of books you read. More wall gazing. That's what I would recommend. Sit down, schedule yourself. You don't have to do a block sit every day, but you could do a block sit once in a while, which I think you do. And during the block sit, nothing else. Nothing added on. And how do we do that? We notice how we keep adding things on. Now, you may notice that there's very little negativity happening. That won't last. I'm not saying you're doomed to start feeling negativity next week or next year, and that's somehow progress. The whole idea of progress is a relative, mundane concept from the point of view. And we have to use some kind of words, and even point of view doesn't work too well. Progress is the whole idea of progress is not a part of the Buddhist path, other than those teachers who have felt that it's necessary to talk about different stages, like the 10 Bodhisattva bhumis, and sometimes 11, sometimes 12. I would say as soon as they start giving me different numbers, I start thinking bunny rabbits. It's just rabbits, the 6 and the 9 are just, two different numbers that one looks like a snake and one looks like a rabbit. So, and the 7, what is that? A hitchhiking 1? It's just, I'm being silly and probably not entertaining at all, but I'm just saying that be tentative about any time you start to look like getting somewhere, because there isn't anywhere to get. There's just this. It just shows up as red, blue, white, dark, light, deep, shallow, just all the different references that describe somewhat about the texture of it. We add on, we salt and pepper we flavor and put spices in everything because we don't want to be bored. We want to have some adventure. If you see what this is, you'll never be bored again. No guarantee.
Sokuzan has a question.
Mm-hmm.
Can we choose to or encourage prioritizing awareness?
Well, we sit down and look at the wall as a meditation, so we're encouraging that. And then when we get up off the cushion in our everyday activity, the awareness will start to show up ahead of the thinking process. The way you know this is happening is you have more of a feeling of you don't know what's going on. More of a feeling of, and the ego mind, the seventh consciousness, gets nervous about this. So it's like, and we, because we feel sensitive or vulnerable in this area, one of those 4, self-view, self-conclusion, self-pride, and self-love, one of those is going to be your favorite. And you're going to, one of those will probably start operating. You can study them. They're all over the place. Even Wikipedia is full of it. And not that there aren't other dynamics or the combination of 2 dynamics sometimes, but just look at the way that occurs. And don't add, subtract, divide, no math. Have a willingness to just be an as it is garden. which is your private Dharma name that is now, I have made that public. They're switched around. I might switch them back next week. So don't get too cozy in your garden.
Juan has a question. He has actually two questions. The first one is, are we always just receiving? And then secondly, how can we relate strongly to people without running our mouths, particularly in our current setting?
That's difficult. Unyo and I are experiencing that. We're kind of trapped together here. First 4 or 5 weeks was pretty good until my birthday came along, and then I just didn't get enough special training or care or something. So I whined about it. So to address your question, what was the question?
Well, the first one was, are we always just receiving?
Yes, you're receiving, and sometimes it's force feeding because the life is forcing you to accept or be with or to receive stuff that you don't want. So there's always some kind of receiving going on. The idea is to hone that and to be more endeavor to see the fundamental nature of the mind. And that begins, that starts to show up as Bodhichitta, the mind of awakening. There's some kind of a deep understanding that this could be understood deeply and not just superficially as some kind of materialistic gain and loss situation, life and death, sickness and health, and all the other various peregrinations of the world order and the 8 worldly dharmas. What was the next part of the question?
How can we relate strongly to people without running our mouths, particularly in our current setting?
Stay in your senses. The sense of seeing never says a word. The sense of hearing never says anything. Sense of taste doesn't produce anything. Stay in the receiving area of the consciousness rather than the production area, which is chatter, chatter, chatter. I think you should do this, but you shouldn't paint it that color because if you paint that, look what's going to happen. You have all these blue things right next to this magenta thing. Why would you do it that way? Are you stupid? Haven't looked really closely? Not meditating enough? Get back to the cushion. Is that what you're telling them? So just receive. And when you receive, the interesting thing about this, if you're receiving your own body position, how you're sitting, how the other person is sitting, don't jump away from how they're sitting into an interpretation of they're all closed off, even though they might be. If you think you have to conclude that when you look at someone, then you abandon what you're seeing for the conclusion about it, and this is what happens to the rest of the investigation. It stops. You know this is without even thinking about it. You know what it is. You know it's closing off. But to say that in your mind and start to add up little things, they're like this, and they seem to pull on their ear, so that means they're lying. It's on and on. It's not that it couldn't be helpful in some ways if you were a detective or something, but from the point of view of awareness, keep it very simple and very apolitical.
Kozan asks, what is meant by authentic as it regards presence?
So it's unauthentic presence would be that which is generated for some kind of an outcome. I'm going to just be present. Well, I'm just going to be here. I'm just going to be present here. And I'll just receive. And little mini lectures that we give ourselves that is more like Tony Robbins or something. It's not that it doesn't have a relative reality to it, but especially with the kind of charisma that Tony Robbins came into life with. I mean, you probably believe anything he said just because his way of producing it is so sweet.
Shoto asks, how are we maintaining the windows and doors on our building or the seventh consciousness?
just continually using them, slamming them shut, opening them a crack to let in things we really like, but then keep out those other things with beaver faces. We're always picking and choosing, You can come in. It's called prejudice. You can come in, but you guys can't. I'm not saying you should open your doors of your house and let all the mice come in, although we did that. We had to kill them. So I'm not saying to go overboard about a little bit. So watch the way you keep adjusting and have a little bit of, something you actually have a little bit of say-so about, you'll call karma. So it's always about awareness, strengthen the awareness, sit a lot, sit until till the whole shebang stops being a shebang and it starts to be consciousness only, perception only. And then anything can arise, anything can go away because nothing actually occurs. It occurs, but its occurrence is just a twitch of an eyebrow in the middle of a vast, endless space.
And Nicole has a question that Wendy asked, but it's slightly different. When you mentioned warfare and peace fair, what does peace fair mentality look like?
So it could show up lots of different ways. It could show, just a general way that I think everyone would recognize is someone who sees an enemy, and rather than work with the foundations of that enemy, which is either in oneself, which is passion, aggression, ignorance, hope, and fear, simply put, or out in the world, it would be take. When I say take isn't so good, but observe your ability to respond to whatever is occurring on the area of warfare that engenders a reaction, R-E, not action, reaction. I guess it would go this way, R-E, reaction, a reaction to something. So that's actually, you've actually aligned yourself with the very warfare that you're trying to get to go to peace. So you create that. It's like, and I could write some stories about it, come up with some ideas about it, but rather than it's all over the world politically, it's obvious, but it's also obvious in family relationships where somebody's trying to control the rest of the family. And sometimes we'll do it with violence. And I'm not saying that an 8-year-old boy who's being abused by his parents hasn't much say so about that. It's just the dynamics of the situation at the time. But the causes and conditions that brought that about are being ignored. So then going to peace fair would be a reaction to the war rather than a fundamental nature of tranquility. Tranquility doesn't need warfare to prove it's tranquil. It doesn't need beating that. You see it. You see it on the news. You can see it. You can see the rotation of ideas and opinions happening on television, on different programs. News programs are starting to modify that. The advertisers are starting to actually use the lockdown to make more money. You don't have to go against it. Don't have to do anything with it. Just be aware of it. Then anything you do need to do, as you've heard me say many, many times, will happen out of the causes and conditions. So you're not interfering with anything. You're just not necessarily allowing causes and conditions to come in and take you over as the polarity with which you are observing the other end of the polarity. If you go to peace, you're going to have war.
Tayo has a question. Can we bring our awareness to something we are not conscious of, such as ignorance?
I think we can. And, Tayo, how that might show up is so different for each person. Some people are maintaining a wall, as it says in the Heart Sutra, Mukege Ko, the walls of the mind. We're maintaining that because there's some kind of fear behind it that if what's on the other side of that just might be too, we just might not be able to handle it. It might be just too devastating to us. So we maintain that ignorance. We polish it occasionally. We might even draw a door on it. Maybe even draw some hinges, draw a handle, and say, at some point, I'm probably going to actually go in there. I'm being a little bit silly about it, but I'm saying we strategize that situation, especially once we start doing sitting meditation. That's why it's so necessary to have a teacher, so necessary to be with a Sangha, as you hear me say. That formula is just astonishing. It's a genius. Teaching, teacher, community. Very simple. Doesn't mean that the teacher, he, she, they know everything. There's some kind of a deity. It's not about a god or a deity, even though sometimes that modality shows up in the theistic religions, and even in some in the Tibetan Buddhist forms, if it's misunderstood. So yes, we see it, but we don't really realize necessarily that it is illusory, that ignorance is actually fabricated and built. It's the warp and woof of that is passion and aggression and ignorance. Passion and aggression together is ignorance. Or you could also say the warp and woof of maintaining our ignorance is hope and fear. Warp and woof again. Hope looks very positive. You have to have hope. No, you don't. Hope is a highly polished, silvery, highly greased form of ignorance. You don't need to go there. Just this, not hope. This won't play well to people who will say, well, you got to have hope. We hear it all the time. And we hear people actually use the word hope as a slogan. It's like taking a huge golden tarpaulin and putting it over the very thing that needs to be investigated, which is what? You know what I'm talking about. Not just you, Tayo, but everybody does. You know that we're covering things up. It is about seeing through that. It's about seeing through it. I'll help you. If you'll let me. You might not let me. The way in which I help you, I get to decide that. You don't. If you want to decide how you're going to be helped, you're talking to the wrong dude.
We have several more questions, so we'll keep going.
Yeah, we have no time limit today. We can do whatever we want.
Chisho has a follow-up question. Thank you. What is the relationship between the seventh consciousness and awareness? Are they the same?
So the seventh consciousness isn't exactly on receive or awareness. It's on manipulating what is being received. It has. I use the metaphor. It has doors and windows, and the whole idea of the first sixth sense field, including the thinking all that sixth consciousness does is keep track of as a way of looking at consciousness is just keep a track of things so that the same consciousness that is smelling is the same one that's tasting, the same one that's hearing, thinking, and doing all of this. It just keeps. It's kind of the vice president of confusion, and then the president is the seventh consciousness, which can do whatever it wants because it's in that presidential situation. It can, it has direct connection to the Alaya or the storehouse consciousness, and so it's going to modify anything that comes through there. It's constantly politically incorrect with everything, and it's politically correct from its own point of view. But it's just the politics of experience are just devastating from the point of view of someone's ongoing working with their innate Buddha nature and working with their bundle of karma that have come from beginningless time until now. When I say beginningless time, maybe past lives, maybe past lives on other planets. I don't know. I'm not concerned with it. What I'm concerned with is this. This is what I'm concerned with.
Mark asks, is there a place for the idea of God to surrender the illusion of control to?
Well, that can be kind of tricky because I'm not saying you couldn't use that. Repeat the question. I'll try to be more succinct.
Is there a place for the idea of God to surrender the illusion of control to?
You don't need to surrender the illusion of control. If you do that, then there's some kind of otherness that you're surrendering it to. And there might be a little bit of that going on, but what little I know of you, I think you've already done that. Now, this doesn't mean that when someone else is using that you shouldn't, or you wouldn't, of course, support that and even talk that language. I know it's a word, God. It's a word, Buddha. It's a word, Buddha nature. It's a word. They're words. They're concepts. But the area that is misunderstood when we start getting into God is it starts to show up as some kind of otherness that is higher than us. And we have this is where the whole higher power comes in. This is just bullshit. Sorry. It's bullshit. And I'm not saying it won't help someone relatively to use that. There are people all over the world that totally throw all of their money and all of their devotion and all of their prayers and everything into their idea of Jesus, Muhammad, even God, even the Buddha. Some people, that's the way they look at Buddha, as a deity, as some kind of savior, medicine Buddha, and all the other various ways of operating. And the way it looks here, it looks like everybody, because of people's karma, are going to need different ways of working with this. And some people are not ready to look at nothing, look at emptiness, not the relative nothing. We can all do that, but look at ultimate nothing, emptiness, shunyata. This is a basic teaching of the Buddha from the get-go: emptiness of self, emptiness of other. And to be able to see that, it looks like loss, because it is loss from the personal point of view. It's death to ego. And most people are not ready for that. So we meet them, as I say, over and over again. I meet people where they're at, or I try to, because I was met by both of my teachers where I was at. And it was, I didn't realize it at the time. I was looking back on it, how stunning that was, and how incredibly insightful it was to meet me and treat me in exactly the way I needed to be treated, so I could transcend or go beyond, or at least see deeply into, if not go beyond, my fixations about who I was, what the world was, what this whole thing was about, and what was important, what wasn't important. So I would say, knowing you, Mark, I don't think you could make any mistakes. You just meet people where they're at and work with them where they're at. Especially being trained as a physician, you can't come in and into a surgical theater and say, wait a minute, this is open heart surgery. I wanted to just remove an appendix, so I'm going to remove his appendix. So, I mean, this is silly, but there are people who are functioning that way who are spiritual guides, because there's a subtle fuel line running from everything they do, and anything they receive, anything from anybody, any kind of adulation or respect or money or whatever, it immediately goes into the seventh consciousness. See, I was right. I had a reason to be prideful, because I am a great person and I am a great teacher, and I am. So that area resonates with the theistic. That's a theistic approach. If someone is a so-called great teacher, like His Holiness Dalai Lama, there's no self-centeredness there. It's just not happening. It's not that they're not smiling and friendly, but they're able to meet people where they are. As the same as true with His Holiness the 17th or 16th Karmapa, whom I met, and the 17th Karmapa, whom I met in the Sambhogakaya. Don't believe a word I say.
Susan has two questions. Her first one is absolute black behind clear light? And her second one, is this from which light emerges?
Black and white, or light and dark, are just relative words that we get from what our sense feels notice. We look out and it's light and it's dark. And then there's all the other things that happen to get in the way of it, which are called shapes and colors and movement. And so it transcends the polarity. So there's no That's the whole idea of sacred and profane. From the point of view of, if you need to use those words, from the point of view of the Buddha Dharma, there isn't anything that isn't sacred. Everything is fundamentally, clearly, completely holy and valuable. And everywhere you look, you're seeing your Buddha nature. You're seeing awakened truth. You're seeing Tathagata Garbha. You're seeing the Buddha mind. Take my word for nothing. Don't believe it. Don't disbelieve it. Don't look away. Consider it. I mean, if you're here, you could consider it.
Let's see. Question from Tim from New Boston, Michigan. This is his first time watching.
Mm-hmm.
He asks, can we choose our reaction to emotions, or do they just happen?
So the whole idea of choosing is just a misunderstanding. Of course, we're choosing some things, but because we don't want to be perceived as someone who's out of control, then we load up, we fuel the choosing area. Like, oh, I'm just choosing. Well, you got to make the right choices. Well, you should make the correct choice. You're not picking any choices. And I'm not saying just you. I'm saying this. Right, their choices are add-ons. It's highly stylized, perfumed illusion. Well, I made the right choice. You don't make any choices. And I sound like I'm mocking. I don't mean to do that, but it's like that. We kind of think, notice your question and answer with people that you're in conversation with. Well, you got to make the right choice. Well, that's for sure. Well, he's just making a lot of bad choices, I'm not saying that this isn't relatively true, but if you want to find out fundamentally what this is, the heartbeat of the Buddha is, you can't sit on the surface and fight with floating leaves. You just can't do it. This leaf is better than that. Well, look at this one's about to sink. Why would you jump on that one? There's no way you can tell just by seeing 3 inches into causes and conditions. There's no way you can see billions and billions of miles. You can't see it unless you see what that is. Then you can't help but see billions and billions of miles, because space and time collapse. And they collapse into what? Buddha, or awake. You don't even have to use the word Buddha. It's not a person. It's the nature of this amazing place that we've been downloaded into. This school of the mind, this school of karma, this school of desire, wanting something else. What was the other part of his question?
It was, can we choose our reaction to emotions, or do they just happen?
So I usually don't do either or, but in your case, since you're new, I will say no. You don't choose anything. And they don't just happen either. That's extra. So when I say no, I mean it. No. Ask more questions if you have them. I'm all about that. I like to hear what I have to say too.
Adriana from Kalamazoo has a question. I do a lot of writing. How can I think about staying in the receiving mode when I am writing?
Don't think about staying in the receiving mode. Just produce. Just produce. Just write. Writers write. Artists art. Musicians music. Just do it. No, nothing extra. Stay in that particular arena of writing. Just write. Don't endeavor to be sophisticated. Sometimes it isn't automatic writing, but one of the ways that can help you perhaps deepen or extend that presence. Sometimes writers have difficulty with this. Spend the first half hour of your writing describing anything that's in front of you. Go to the cupboard and get out a vase or a coffee grinder or something. Sit it down in front of you and describe it. Spend a half an hour describing everything about it. Did I do that? Nope. But I'm telling you to do it. Or I'm recommending that you do it.
Carl from Kalamazoo asks, Is staying in the world of the senses another way of saying that awareness is out in front of thinking?
A little bit of that, I would say so. It's not something, there's nothing to be maintained. It's interesting that if the awareness is noticing whether you're being aware or whether you're thinking, then which awareness is doing that? Is it the CEO of awareness? The chief, the wolf chief of the Hidatsa tribe?
Joseph from Kalamazoo asks, what would emotional look like on the idea of awareness? Let's see. What would emotional lockdown on the idea of awareness look like? Yes. What would emotional lockdown on the idea of awareness look like?
I think it's probably a good idea. Awareness, the idea of awareness. Go lock down. That's called studying. You're studying the nature of those concepts and the way that's how it would look. It would look as it looked. And you can get a little bit of a feeling that it might be, use the fancy word, authentic, when it doesn't last. When the very rotation of causes and conditions that show up as definitive around what you're asking starts to collapse back into the netherworld. Just observe. Or don't.
Juan asks, what is self-view?
Seeing everything in terms of yourself. Seeing everything is about you. Whatever happens, it's about you. Whatever happens, there's a little bit of pride there, but mainly it's just a referential thing. It's about you. I know that's one of mine. It's when I'm going to get this or get something to eat or something. It's about me. It's about what's happening to me. And these days, because you can't help but be concerned with health, because the body is very old, especially now, 79 years as of yesterday. So it's self-view. Not wrong. We're not trying to get rid of that. We're not trying to be this highly polished person that doesn't have anything happening in the sound of consciousness. Your screen has not frozen. I'm just a ventriloquist. So again, it's about seeing the self-view. It's about seeing the self. Pride of self is very difficult to get into view, because if we start to get a little bit of that, how much that is, then we immediately go into shame. We think, oh my God, I've been thinking how wonderful I am. And it's just not. And it's obvious to everyone. The self-view, self-conclusion, pride of self, love of self is visible to everyone in different. Some of those are more. Pride is more visible to everyone, pretty much, because it's so puffy. Shame is not so, and that's one of the reasons we go into shame, is because it's the way you can still maintain your self-reference. I'm the terrible person, which is not that much different than I'm the person who really knows. I don't know why people don't ask me about this. I just know so much, and I just want to share. I just want to be a servant to everyone. Baloney. And when I say baloney, it's baloney. Carnivore. So what I would say is go into that area and find the consciousness that sees those polarities. Don't grasp onto one and reject the other. Either direction, do nothing. Don't try to get rid of your pride. You're not going to be able to help people if you overcome your difficulty as some kind of person who's somehow better than the rest of humanity that is suffering intensely through their passion, aggression, and ignorance. You need to keep, you could say keep it, or you need to not do anything with it, but just be aware of it, so that which is aware is beginning to transcend the physical attachment and lockdown, the emotional lock. You don't have to get rid of the emotions. You need those emotions. You need that intense negativity in order to save all beings, because that's what they're going through and that's what they're trying to cover up. And if you see yours and you don't cover it up, this is called Bodhichitta. This is my way of talking about relative Bodhichitta. I don't say drive all blames into Juan Gonzales. I say, just look at it. Don't do anything with it. Don't drive. Unless I say that, I might say that specifically to a person. But just being aware of that. And in that way, when you meet someone who's dealing with something very similar that they can't see, you can see it, and you know better than to point it out to them. Because you know when it was pointed out to you, you hit out. It made you go deeper. I have students that I pointed out to them very specifically, and the shields come up. I'm just receiving. You know who you are. Receive. Receive. This is not about puffing up and getting better. And if you're puffing up and getting better and it's showing up as pride, or it's showing up as any one of these four self-references, just observe it. Because if the word humility would ever apply to you at all, it would have to apply because you were because you didn't have some kind of specialized feeling about yourself.
We have a final comment from Chisho. He says, "Thank you, Sokuzan. Really appreciate your direct answers."
I appreciate your direct questions. I appreciate all of you. I love all of you. Hopefully this coronavirus will go on forever, and we'll all. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. Nothing has to last, and nothing has to go on forever. Preferences are too highly rated. Anything else? Are we going to
dedicate the merit?
We're going to dedicate the merit according to my lovely wife, Unyo, which means something about cloud.
Yeah, it's sunlit like today.
Sunlit.
Finally.
Sunlit cloud. Okay.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji ho san ji shi hu. Shi son bu sa mo ko sa. Moko ho cha ho ru mi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect SokukoJi Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.
Let it be so. See you later, alligators.